Good morning. I am Jeff Kossif. I'm the other director of the Woods Institute, and it is my pleasure to add my welcome as well. That was a wonderful initial first session, and thank you to Chuck for orchestrating that. So our second session is going to be we titled it A View from the Top, and we have a wonderful panel which will be moderated by Steve Denning, and Steve is the chair of a global private equity firm and also the chairman of the Stanford Board of Trustees, and someone I've known for over 10 years and value as a colleague and a friend and a great advisor to Pam and Buzz and me on the environmental initiative. Next to, you see you're in the wrong order and you messed me up already.
I thought you were supposed to be here.
Oh, they
All right,
moved
Steve.
me.
No,
Okay.
Steve, stay where you are.
They told me seat 2. Right?
Yeah, okay.
You guys back there did it.
All right. So Steve Wesley, who introduced himself earlier, he was one of the early executives at eBay, and he runs the Wesley Group. And he was also the controller and CFO of the state of California, which was then the world's 5th largest economy. And I think it's slipped a little since then, right, Steve?
It has. We get back to work.
Yeah. Next to Steve is Andy Geis. Andy is the CEO of Business Solutions at AT&T. And AT&T does actually serve Business Solutions does serve every Fortune 1000 company, so quite an accomplishment, as well as smaller scale businesses in neighborhoods as well, so I think there's a nice range of scale. And finally, we have Greg Page. Greg is the executive chairman of Cargill. As many of you know, Cargill is one of the 10 largest companies in the US in terms of revenue. They have supply chains that span 70 business units in 67 countries, and they serve with distributions in 125, so it's quite an operation. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve Denning, and we will hear the view from the top. Thank you.
Well, welcome to everybody. As Sally Jewell said, I've had the pleasure of having a variety of touch points. So I was on the National Parks Conservation Board for about 10 years, where I first met Pam Matson and Sally Jewell. So that has obviously, been a key board for me. When I first joined the board, a little over 10 years ago, Ward Woods was my board mentor. And then he went on to both endow and name this institute that's done so much. So the whole concept of sustainability is something that is personally as well as institutionally of tremendous importance to me. I mean, one thing that Jeff didn't mention is I just stepped down a few months ago as one of the co-chairs of the Nature Conservancy, that obviously is an institution in the NGO world that's very committed to global sustainability. And therefore, you can see this thread running through at least what I am personally been committed to. And as Pam has indicated earlier, and as Sally said in her remarks, business must be sustainable. And I think we are that core element. I mean, it's obviously a huge collaborative effort with institutions like Stanford, or educational institutions, our NGOs, and our government. But business is, in fact, the core in terms of our ability to really affect the change that all of us in this room very much want to occur and feel must occur in the future. So with that, I wanted we've got a very unique opportunity today in that we have recognized leaders in the field of sustainability and what they've done for their individual businesses. But we've got, again, quite a continuum of businesses, and that we've got, with Greg, one of the very largest private businesses on the globe, and one of the very successful ones, one that's been very devoted to sustainability as an element, a key element of their strategy. We then go to one of the very largest public companies right here in the United States. I mean, one with 250,000 employees, 185 billion market cap. And Andy runs one of the key business units in there, and will speak for what that corporation has done in and around sustainability. And then Steve, who is today running one of the leading clean tech investment firms here in the U.S. and really the massive activities that occurs there is through his portfolio companies of over 20 different portfolio companies, but obviously given his role here in the state of California and his vantage point in terms of some of the investment groups that he was involved in, brings, again, a very, very different point to the table. So with that, what we intend to do here is we'll cover a few questions up here, and then we're going to open it up to all of you, because I think we have in this room an enormous body of talent that's concerned about long-term sustainable business. So with that, I wanted to turn to Greg and just get his view as to how Cargill has gone about making sustainability an essential element of their mission, their values, and their strategy. Greg.
Okay, reaction to a very broad question. The mission statement of Cargill is to be the global leader in nourishing people, and therefore global food security is something we spend a lot of time thinking about, and you can't think about it in the absence of doing that sustainably, since it needs to be a repeatable activity. Each and every season, we need to go back and be sure the way we behaved in producing the world's calories and grams of protein in the prior year did not detract from our capacity to do that yet again the following year. And so the two big drivers in our business are food security, which inextricably is linked to sustainability. The other thing that's evolved, and the comment was made by Secretary Jewell about more of the millennials are urban and are further detached from nature than ever before. They're also further detached from where their food comes from. And so as that has happened, it's curious, at the time we're the most attached, we also seem to have the most interest in it, and the most people shaping opinions about food production in curious ways. The net effect of that for us is sustainability has become critical to all of our customers. First, the customers that actually buy from us, the General Mills and the Krafts and the Nestles of the world, but most importantly, in turn, their consumers. And so we find ourselves caught in a period of time where education and awareness and transparency around where food comes from and how it's produced is more important than ever. So those are our links to sustainability.
So let me just follow up on that. I mean, we have the benefit today of having two private companies, one enormous one relatively smaller, and one of our largest public companies. But what was the genesis of that particular thrust as having a core to the mission of Cargill? Was it management? Was it your shareholders? Was it outside pressures? All of the above?
No, I think the genesis in 1999 is when we had adopted our current set of mission principles, and I don't think it was nearly as fashionable at that point in time. So we are family owned. The same family's owned us since 1865, and clearly it's at the heart of their belief system. But as we saw how population was growing, how rising incomes created particularly more B and C class consumers and the demands that they had for a more diverse diet, the issue of food security became quite obvious to us as an area that we needed to focus more attention. And that quickly led to this issue around the capacity to produce the needs for today's society without impacting the capacity to meet the needs of future.
So let me just hammer you with one last question before we
Pound away.
Keep going, that's okay.
Before we move on. So does it give you a relative competitive advantage to be private in your industry vis-a-vis this particular issue? When I look at Bunge and Archer Daniel and so forth?
Yeah, I hope not. That given the proportion of our foodstuffs that are processed and traded by public firms, I think we have to believe that all in our industry, we'd be happy to be a leader, but we'd only like to be a leader in the sense that other people quickly emulate that. Because in the absence of emulation, it's pretty hard for the world to be sustainable from a food production standpoint on the back of Cargill's efforts alone. And so we are hopeful that public companies, and I see that increasingly being the case, that particularly for issues driven by customers and consumers, that the speed of emulation and imitation is very high, and I think that's a really good thing. That being said, are there investments that we might make sooner than other people as a result of not having the pressures of quarterly results? I think I see evidence of that quarter in and quarter out.
So Andy, maybe you can talk about an aspect of that in the context of AT&T being one of our largest public companies, with the pressures that public companies are under today and the increasing short-term orientation as distinct from longer-term that I think all of us would espouse here in this room. So would sustainability be considered a peripheral value that contributes to the core, or a core value that contributes to the mission?
Good question. I would say a little bit of both. So it started, I would say, in our company over the last 20 years as more of efforts that contribute to the value of the company and for our customers and our shareholders. For example, it started many years ago on just simple things like energy efficient equipment and making those investments. But it has changed now where, we've always had in our corporate values to give back to the community. Mm-hmm. And now sustainability has become no longer something that's just a little project here or a little project there. It's part of our core strategy. It's part of our core thinking and what we do day in and day out, Steve. And I'll just add one other thing. I think it's not a public relations game.
Yeah.
It's real projects, real things that really change the game. So I can go through
Well, maybe you could elaborate on some, because one of the key elements, it seems to me, is how do you create this culture of sustainability across the organization where it's being embraced not only by your employees, by your management, by your shareholders, your supply chain, and it's one where you make it very clear that the organization, this is a commitment that we are pursuing, and it's being done on a broad basis as an organization across these constituencies.
Yeah, good question. So like I said, it started with all these individual projects, IT, fleet management, et cetera. And it was really our chairman and CEO, Randall Stevenson, who decided, this needs to be a more coordinated effort across the company. Everybody was kind of doing their own thing. We have natural gas vehicles, we have, cooling tower improvements, et cetera. Yeah. And he created a chief sustainability officer, and her role is to work across all of us. So there's only 3 big business units inside AT&T. I run one, there's 2 other folks, and we now have folks, all the folks that are doing sustainability in our areas now basically also work for her. That's put that stake in the ground. One of the first things she did to make it more of a cultural thing versus tactical kind of individual products is we have something we call DOT. And it stands for do one thing. Mm. And we got all 250,000 employees involved in what we call DOT. And they all take on a DOT. And some of them are big ideas. Like, I'll give you an example that has literally saved us millions of dollars. One was a DOT in a particular garage, and you guys probably don't understand the telecom world. We have these garages all over the country with trucks in it, et cetera, and they're all putting equipment into businesses and your homes, and they did one just around how they could better reuse all of the whether it's packaging, whether it's old equipment, et cetera. And not only does it save what we put out into the trash areas, but we're actually getting the employees in that culture view happy about it, really excited about it and proud about it.
So does the corporation's commitment give you a sustainable competitive advantage vis-a-vis your competition, vis-a-vis your ability to attract the right type of talent, retain the right type of talent, so forth?
Yeah, I would say yes to that. So Greg mentioned it. Not only you have a corporate responsibility, but more and more of your customers are asking, what are you doing?
Yeah.
about your carbon footprint. What are you doing about, saving? And it attracts, I'll give you an example. AT&T made a statement, oh my gosh, how long ago was it? 2007. Well, we're going to do 15,000 vehicles that are alternative fuel. Everybody thought we were crazy. Our competitors thought we were crazy. It's a huge investment on our part. We've already got 10,000 of them out there, so we're way ahead of what we expected to do. We look at it, and we've now gone back and looked at that, as not only has that been positive with our customers, we've actually saved enough fuel to really pay for the program. So we view that as a competitive advantage in the long run.
Are there reverse examples where you've had to incur reasonably significant upfront costs to achieve the sustainability objective and potentially therefore had a cost disadvantage in the short term but then realized a long-term benefit?
Well, that's one for sure.
Yeah.
We went out and replaced a lot of vehicles. I'll give you another one. When I used to be CIO, and this was one of the more tactical ones, but we started, a green IT before sustainability was the big word. Huge investment, because what it meant is we came up with this whole plan on how we can get more green, basically, in our IT world. And trying to sell that to the accountants was crazy. Now I look back, and we closed 7 data centers. We upgraded all of our storage, all of our hardware to low energy type equipment. And I look back now, and it's paid off. But getting that first buy-in, you're going to go in and spend all this money, and all you're talking about is, saving a little bit of energy. Well, it pays off in the long run. I really believe that.
What about back through the supply chain? I mean, that's one of the things that AT&T is quite noted for with regard to leading that particular type of effort.
It's been, it was hard to begin with, but if you go out, for example, to our website and look at cell phones, they all have eco rating. Well, that was something we forced back into the supply chain because, we're a $126 billion company, and we probably spend about 60 of that through or more than that actually, through our supply chain. And getting them involved in that is a key part of the success. And we actually have sessions with them. We tell them what our goals are. We tell them what we expect. And so it's we drive it through their culture as well.
So how have you seen their receptivity change over the last 5 years? I mean, is there increasing receptivity among the various vendors that you're dealing with in terms of affecting the change that all of us in this room want to achieve?
Yeah, I would say, my viewpoint is increasingly positive. So I would say 10 years ago when we started a lot of this, a lot of resistance. You're adding cost to our products. You're adding cost to our, like for example, we forced recycling of batteries, recycling of phones, those sorts of things that were ending up into trash fills. And the initial reaction was, this is going to cost you on your products. And now I see, and it probably did initially, to your point. The initial investment was a little higher. But I think now I see most companies embracing it.
Yeah.
Like, I'll give you a great example. Samsung, Korean company, they've got some of our best eco-friendly devices. If you go out on our website and look, well, that didn't start that way. It wasn't in the culture.
It's good to hear.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
So Steve, it helped our business because we make biodegradable, biorenewable plastics for the cases for these cell phones. So AT&T's pressure feeding back through those companies. But to your point, 10 years ago, it would have been very
hard. Yeah.
Cost prohibitive, but through innovation today, the cost of biorenewable plastics is within a few percentage points of hydrocarbon plastics for these applications.
So Greg, before I switch to Steve here, just talk a little bit about the receptivity in your supply chain. So very same question.
Yeah, so for a lot of our customers, they have remained very disciplined in that food needs to be sustainable, it needs to be safe, and it needs to be affordable. And it's that third component that takes the work, because major retailers want to continue to offer value to consumers. And so they are receptive. They are putting demands similar to what Andy talked about on their supply chains, but the demand includes a demand around the cost. And so I think it's been net good. It's probably slowed things down in some cases where there may have been, you could argue, economically unsustainable technologies that could have been deployed sooner. But where there's a will, there's a way, and we're starting to see that in a lot of areas.
But overall, you feel the current's moving kind of in the right direction among
enormously.
the various
Yeah.
parties.
It's beyond a current. There's some
Yeah.
stronger descriptor.
Yeah,
than
real
that.
movement. Yeah. So shifting to Steve, because I mean, he runs a business where, by definition, because of the way he's defined it, a lot of it is less retrofitting what's there, but working with what he puts into his portfolio up front. So, Steve, give us a little bit of idea of how you've incorporated this whole notion and why you selected this as something when you came out of government.
Well, first, I feel like I have the most exciting job in the world. It's highly risky. We have firms fail all the time, but when you have something that succeeds, we were an early investor in Tesla, it can change the world. So I hope you all appreciate the irony here. My job is to disintermediate what these guys in America's great companies are doing.
Only some of them.
But that's all of them. But that's a good thing, because it forces them to raise the bar. We have some failures, and both those things are part of the game. But what I wanted to say is this, is if you just went back in time 10 years ago, the number of directors of sustainability, folks, we could have had this meeting in a phone booth. There just weren't that many. And I think, to use the metaphor of a light, you know, when you told the CEO, we're going to shine a light on sustainability, the instant answer was, great, let's stay out of it. Now more and more companies are realizing that if they can be in the spotlight for doing the right thing, it's not only a great thing for the planet, it's a great thing for the brand, but it helps you to sell to everybody, but especially this new group of 79 million people that Secretary Jewell talked about, the millennials. So we think that is a big step forward. But I think the next step, if you ask the question, what should we look for in the next 10 years, is I think more and more companies will be saying, let's not just be green so we can put that in the TV ad or stamp it on the box. Let's make ourselves a leader in selling green products. And I wanted to give HP a shout out. I saw Chris Lieber here. I was on their environmental advisory board, and they said, well, we're not going to sell green products. We're HP. We're not Method or Tesla. We sell boxes with, you know, big iron. But Meg, over the course of 2-3 years, realized that one of the most compelling value propositions they have is to sell servers that use dramatically less power than anybody in the business. So it wasn't just a let's green up the brand as an afterthought. It was a core sales proposition that became a very, very big deal. And I think more and more companies, Tesla not the least of them, are realizing being green is not a subsidiary issue. It is a game changer. It is precisely what may enable you to take a dramatic amount of market share. We can talk about Tesla later, but everybody teased me when we invested in the firm. It was 23 people in San Carlos, California. And they were saying, yeah, we're going to remake the American auto industry. And people said, oh my God, are you crazy with 23 people in a warehouse? Today they have a market cap half of General Motors. So what I just want to suggest is the rapidity of this disintermediation and change, especially in our area, is coming faster than I think most people appreciate.
So you have a window on some of the new technologies and the disintermediation that's occurring and the technological disruption that's resulting from that. But put it in the context of sustainability. Other than Tesla, what do you think are one or two great examples of things 10 years from today we're going to be looking back on?
Let me just mention 2 things there. One, we're seeing a revolution in building energy efficiency. For our entire lives, buildings have been dumb buildings. They've essentially been boxes. We are kind of the laughingstock of the world. We're moving very quickly toward digitized smart buildings. This is going to happen very, very quickly. LED lighting controls. Folks, please don't laugh at me here, but you're going to see smart windows, and your lights in your windows will actually talk to each other. This issue of electric vehicles, and frankly, and again, you're going to think I'm a little crazy, but driverless vehicles, we have no stake in this, but I'm just here to tell you they're coming. But here's the big thought for all of you. Most of my entire life, the person from Chevron may not like this, but most of my entire life, we've heard that economic growth in our country and every country, economic growth grows in lockstep with use of carbon fuels. That's what they taught us at Stanford. That's what they told us when I worked at the Department of Energy. We now know that's not true at all. And here's what I want to throw out to you. And this is a big thought, but I think we can see it in the horizon. We're not that far from seeing a day where, because of the preponderance of solar, with costs going down and financing being the more important of the two, and dramatic uptick in electric vehicles, prices is coming down faster than you think, where a lot of people, and we'll be there in our house in about 4 to 5 years, will not be paying a penny for gas or electricity ever again.
Will the lights be on?
That's a big thought. If you saw how many lights our family used, you would be astonished. But again, that changes a lot of stuff. We'll be there, and again, the power we use in our household would make you blanch. We use so much. So big things are happening, coming faster than you think.
Well, I mean, I think some of these technological disruptions, I mean, you talk about the driverless car. I mean, in deference to the folks from GM in the room. I mean, when you combine that with the ownership detachment that one has with the vehicle, I mean, it could be a profound change that impacts all of us in a very, very dramatic way.
Yeah, look, we don't have an investment in this area. God bless Google for thinking about it, but about 33,000 people die a year in auto accidents. The congestion, I was just in Southern California, is mind-boggling. And then there are all the seniors who cannot drive at a certain age. It solves more problems, creates more productivities than you can imagine. The technology is largely here. It's just a question of how quickly it will be rolled out. And then, who will the winners be? You said in deference to GM, I'd love to see GM be a winner. I'd like to see an American firm own the space. What's interesting is if the winner is an American firm like Google instead of a car company, which could well be the case. That's what makes Silicon Valley exciting.
So if you put your looking glass up, I mean, you said 10 years ago it was a phone booth. We got this group here today. What do you think it looks like 10 years from today?
I think 10 years from today, as I said before, there'll be 10 times more people, but you're going to see CEOs here saying, I used to think of my firm as a car firm or an agricultural firm or a communications firm. We're now a sustainability firm that's changing the world and serving people's needs. I'll give you just one example. I just was invited to speak at the Global Executive Conference for a firm called E.ON, one of the larger utilities in the world. We were all meeting in Stockholm. It's a utility that serves 13 countries in Europe. And their whole life, 150 years or something, their competition has been Electricité de France and RWE, and that's all they worried about. They're a utility company in Europe. And I stood up there, and they asked me to be the keynote speaker. God knows why. We're in Sand Hill Road. They're in Dusseldorf. And they said, our competition, #1 competitor, Google. They've just bought Nest. We're scared to death. Whole world's changing. You need to help us figure it out. So we're becoming global more quickly. Whole industries are changing. And I just would urge you all to think of the paradigm of Kodak. When I grew up, it's one of the most powerful brands in the world. Every place you went to, you saw Kodak and Coke. We love Kodak. Then they went and invented the technology for digital photography. God bless them. And then never deployed it. And now they're out of business. We need to make sure that story doesn't happen to too many of our companies, because when you're #1, it's easy to get complacent. And the folks in China, India, and everywhere else in the world would like to be preponderant. I want to make sure that we stay on top.
So, Greg, when you look at Cargill, as you indicated, you were early to the game, and you've been a real leader. I mean, if we looked at companies across the United States, and I think a lot of us were selecting ones that were really, had integrated this into their core values in a way that's quite notable, it'd be Cargill. So if you think about that and where that leads you today, and then put that forward 10 years, where do you envision that, not only as it impacts Cargill, but the competitors, the industry, the global scope, and so forth.
I think the biggest thing is enlisting. We don't have the power of being a watchdog, and the Secretary talked about carrots and sticks. We have relatively few sticks or none, and so most of our thought is around how to incent and enlist farmers in this, because I'll use the beef industry as an example. There are people, depending on how you calculate it, say it takes millions of gallons of water to produce one beef animal. Our plants use around 400 pounds, 80% of 400 gallons, about 80% of which we just use for a short period. We anaerobically digest all of our wastewater. We use that to generate methane, to generate electricity to run our plant, and then we release the water back into agriculture, into the rivers. And so the amount of water used outside of our facilities, or the amount of hydrocarbons generated in our supply chains outside of our facilities. So if I had to look forward, it would be the degree of impact we have on both sides of the role that we play. And so particularly starting with producers and since you've been on Nature Conservancy Board, you've heard the expression sustainable intensification.
Yeah.
And we see ourselves as being a key partner with people like TNC to make that intensification happen, because it is the production of more food with less inputs. And I think that's where the big opportunity, and that's what we see the food companies. They now realize a General Mills or a Kellogg's or someone uses relatively modest amounts of water and hydrocarbons in their role in the food chain. But all of us that exist prior to them have very big footprints. And so this more from less is going to occupy us for a long time.
So is there any big game changer coming down the road in your business analogous to the driverless car that could dramatically disrupt the business as you know it today?
If I knew what it was, we'd be walking towards that.
You'd be doing it.
I don't want to cast myself as a Donald Rumsfeld apologist, but the known unknowns or the unknown knowns.
Okay,
But I
got that.
I hope that they are out there. But I do want to make one point that I think is important to everybody in this room. A lot of people introduce themselves as being in communications. I think technology in general, and in the food system in particularly, we've been lousy at enlisting the support and the comfort and the confidence of consumers in science in the food. And whatever's out there, no matter how grand the invention, if we don't do a better job of enlisting comfort with whatever that technology is, we'll be sadly disappointed in our sustainability journey. So we not only have to invent, we have to enlist consumers in the trust of it.
And Andy, you know, the beauty of so many of AT&T's products is, you know, you are able to take work to the individual as distinct from take the individual to work. And so it has a huge inherent benefit in the underlying aspect of your product. But when you look forward 10 years, what do you see on the horizon as it relates to the sustainability movement that we are all a part of here, in terms of it being just embedded in the very fabric of the way we run our corporations?
That's a good question. When I look at the past 10 years and how fast it has moved, what I hope is the next 10 years faster. In the next 10 years, I mean, I don't want to give anybody here a heart attack, but we wouldn't need your jobs, the people that are in sustainability.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is build it into everything we do, build it into our culture of our employees, our suppliers, so that when we're sold something like the latest and greatest server, it's already sustainable in some way. Or when we are, you know, I mean, we consume a huge amount of water every year in our business.
Yeah.
And when you look at what it is, it's mainly cooling towers. And there's ways to do, as a matter of fact, we worked with the environmental fund and basically worked on ways to conserve that water. Well, that's just one example. We believe, and we've worked with them, the EDF, to do this. We believe that that little thing will save 28 billion in gallons of water a year. Now take that back. Why is a company having to do that now, do that research, work with them to do it? You would hope 10 years from now it's just second nature, and everybody is producing things like that. at least in this country.
No,
I think it's going to be a long time before third world catches up.
Yeah.
So we do business all over the world. And what you all are talking about here, you hear it in Europe, but you don't hear it a lot in other parts of the world.
Can I respond to that? I think other parts of the world are lagging on a government standpoint, especially compared to the US and Western Europe. But I think these millennials, this new group of people, they're all communicating on the internet, they're tweeting. They're more in common, a kid here in China and Guatemala, than they have with their parents. I think this next generation is going to force the issues, both with their governments and with buying behavior.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope you're right on that.
So Steve, having come from a government and then running the group today, do you see, I mean, Sally mentioned earlier that, you know, what we have to get done in climate change or sustainability is very much a collaborative effort. It's a team effort. You know, I mean, businesses out there on the vanguard, but it involves NGOs. We've mentioned a couple of them up here today, EDF, TNC, that are working hand in glove with AT&T and Cargill. But how do you really see us beginning to work together in a collaborative sense to affect change going forward, you know, coming from your government's perspective?
Yeah, look, I have two thoughts. Let me give you the standard simple answer, and then I want to say something maybe a little more controversial. The simple answer is everybody's going to work more together. I think business in a lot of ways used to want to resist, hold back. Governments and NGOs were pushing them. I think more and more CEOs realize we're not just going to improve the brand, we're going to sell a lot more product if we're more energy efficient because it saves the customer money and it makes us look better, and so on and so on. Let me just pause here. I happen to drive a Tesla. People are pretty excited.
If you weren't, you'd be in trouble.
People are pretty excited about this, and what they say is, my God, it's such a sexy car, I want one. Or, God, I've seen the number, it's faster than a Porsche. That's cool. It's got a range of 300 miles. The big epiphany with electric cars is none of the above. Oh, it's also the safest car ever tested by the Department of Transportation. It's wonderful things. But folks, the big epiphany, it costs 80% less than a gasoline-powered car to operate. The life cycle cost of owning a Tesla is about the same as a Volkswagen Rabbit or a Ford Taurus. Now, not everybody buys cars based on life cycle cost today, but over time, they're going to realize these things aren't just cool and sleek and good for the planet. They're actually an extraordinary buy. And by the way, the cost is just going down dramatically. So expect a whole new world out there. Here's the other thing I wanted to say that's a little bit controversial, but I wanted you to think about it. I think for the last 50 years in our country, there's been this great political debate that I think in many ways has been a false debate. And you all know it. It's with Republicans on the one side saying we want less regulations, and the Democrats saying we need more regulations, but not necessarily being so good about how you put the regulations into play. And I'll just tell you, I happen to be a Democrat, but I think the debate's largely over, and that is wherever you are on the political spectrum, government just can't keep up. Younger people are going to demand things. The rapidity of technology change is going to make government increasingly irrelevant. And you're going to see these new tech, I mean, there's always going to be government, regulations aren't going away, but companies, I believe, will become the defining bodies, instruments of social change, if you will. This is coming from a Democrat. Companies will be the defining instruments of change, and it's the ones that really do cutting-edge breakthrough things, whether it's Tesla or Google or whoever the next Google is in the future. Those are the ones that will redefine our history. I'm just excited to be part of it, and frankly, with Don Kennedy sitting here as one of my personal heroes, I'm just proud so many of these companies are run by Stanford grads.
So is that the provocative statement, or we got one coming?
I wasn't sure he was really a Democrat. I want to check.
Well, with that, I want to just open it up to this esteemed group in terms of questions. Roberta.
So I actually have two questions, if I might. And one is for Steve, and one I think is for Andy, because of the public company part. The question for you, Steve, is there's a lot of conversation about the extreme energy usage by digital companies, server farms, and so on,
Yep.
whether they are addressing the issue. So that's one. And then I'll just ask my second one, which is, you've described the trajectory moving. Sustainability was kind of something interesting to now it's been sort of integrated into the company. Sustainability represents a long-term perspective. Quarterly results represent a short-term perspective. Do you foresee a time when the long-term value will in fact trump a shorter-term value, where sustainability and profitability may be in direct conflict? Right now you're showing how they work together. So two separate questions.
I can give you a really quick answer to mine. Folks, we and the rest of the planet is going to be using dramatically more energy than people ever anticipated. Some of you may have seen the paper this weekend. One of the international organizations defines the amount of energy use that defines the advanced nation is 100 kilowatt hours a year. Americans use that in 3 days. So the rest of the world's catching up. We're going to be using more. Everybody else is going to be using a ton more. And the key punchline here is cost of renewables is going down, down, down. Expect to see a lot more renewables. Most people don't get this. They think it's kind of a California thing. Close to half of all of the new power put online in all of the United States was renewable last year. So that's just increasing. And as the Secretary said, everybody knows over time, probably sooner rather than later, you'll start having to price carbon in because everybody understands there is a cost to what you put in the air from a health standpoint. So the bad news is we're using more. The good news is I am pretty confident it will just become cleaner, cleaner, and cleaner. So keep your fingers crossed.
Very positive. Andy?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny, I view one and the same, I guess, to really answer your question. In other words, when I look at sustainability, I do believe we look at it from a long-term perspective, not just short-term. And maybe we're unique, I don't know, in the room, but I doubt it. I think most companies, are you under that quarterly pressure? Sure, you always are. But many of the things we've done around sustainability, like I'll give you a small example, just even that do your one thing that I talked about, there was an investment in that, investment in systems, investment in culture internally in terms of putting it out there. It was a long-term investment, taken a long time. We've been at that for 3 or 4 years now to build it into our culture before we're now starting to see some things come out of that really have return. And so I think, at least from the AT&T perspective, we view this as a long-term game. It has to be built into our culture. It has to be built into our supply chain, we think, in the long run. And do we think it's going to pay off in the long run? We do. And I think we've proven that in the last 10 years. Some of the things that we started that we thought would have no payback, like the natural gas cars, are having payback today, and the electric cars we use.
And so your view would be institutional investors and individual shareholders and so forth self-select in terms of choosing AT&T, partly because not only their underlying shorter-term financial performance, but their longer-term aspirations and goals as it relates to these particular elements.
Yeah, you said something earlier which is really true, and we didn't start it this way, but it really is true. It is an important part of our brand today.
Yeah.
You mentioned it, which really surprised me. I'm sure you did your work for this, but that was good, that you recognize we've done a lot of things around sustainability, and that's a good thing for the brand, and I do think it will help in the long run. To your point, the younger kids are smarter, sharper, and they do socially share much better.
Yeah.
And if they know a company's doing something for the good, I think you're right, that will help in the long run.
Yeah. They overshare.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's a different problem.
Is that Chevron?
Yes.
You go ahead.
I get the mic to you. We're recording and it helps with what we'll do later. Get your names.
So, Andy, you mentioned that in connection with your water conservation project, you were able to save billions of gallons of water, and that eventually you wanted projects like that to become second nature for AT&T. Just wondering what tools or channels did you use in order to, or contemplate using in order to make that part of a business model in terms of incentives, policies, performance criteria, any other type of tools that AT&T can employ?
Yeah, good question also. I think that one of the things we've done is for all of our suppliers, we've outlined for them expectations of what we expect from a sustainability perspective. And so that's the first thing, to build it into your supply chain. I mean, we'd like to get to the point where people come to us and they know we aren't going to accept their product or accept their capability if it hasn't moved down the continuum of sustainability. And I think, that it's the same old, same old. You talked about carrot and stick, and I think that's a little bit of truth to that. If what we are buying is in that realm, it's going to create the right sort of incentives for people to continue down the sustainability curve. So that's the first thing. I would say the second thing is, finding with your supply chain, frankly, with your customers, the right sort of projects that make a return for them as well. So let's take the water one as an example. What I said is that we believe that what we did, if the whole world or the whole U.S. would go to it, would save 28 billion gallons of water a year. That's a lot. And for us, we spend about 1 billion gallons of water a year just in water cooling. We think we can save just ourselves about 20% of that. Well, we started that as a project, as a way in sustainability, but we now believe, again, that will return. So how do we build that into all of our water cooling vendors is what it comes down to. And to make sure that as they bring us new stuff, new equipment, as we refresh, that it already has that built in. And so you got to build it into your supply chain.
How about within AT&T? How do you set policy or requirements or business objectives that the AT&T management has to comply with in order to look at the supply chain in that form?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. Like I said, when Randall became our CEO in 2007, one of the first things he did was take all these things I was doing and my counterparts were doing and put together a chief sustainability officer. Well, as part of that, we actually created a board committee around that as well. And so now it's forced at that level throughout our company that this is going to be a priority. As we go out, we look for handsets, we look for product, we look for servers, that sort of thing. So you have to build it into the management culture.
Let me just ask Greg, because a lot of your products are intermediate or not necessarily branded in the classic sense with a consumer. So how do you achieve that recognition, that benefit? How do you get that flowing through? I mean, your customers recognize it, but ultimately to the ultimate end customer. Is that an issue you're grappling with?
No, only to the extent that by us gaining some notoriety for efforts that is helpful to consumers' appreciation that things can be done and are being done to improve the sustainability of the food system. But our customers have very valuable brands, and they want those brands protected by the behavior of the suppliers of the intermediate ingredients. And so that's really where we seek to gain credit. And not just to gain credit, they do roll-ups. And now Walmart's going to have this sustainability index. And so all of our customers are going to have to put a numerical score on many of their products. And the only way they can do that is if we feed through that information and commit to the degrees of improvement so that Walmart can claim those. And they sign our checks on the front. And so they do have, have a powerful carrot.
Pam, did you have a question? I think it's probably our last one.
Well, thank you very much for this great discussion. So I'll go back to my first point today. You're talking about a world in which sustainability is part of everything we do. It's what the company does. It's second nature, as you said. And all of these chief sustainability officers no longer are needed because that's what the company does. That means that the CEO is a sustainability officer, right? So what do you think is needed? What are the key attributes of that leader, and how should education be changing now to make that move more quickly and easily?
So I'll go, I guess, with the benefit of 40 years of watching, is that maybe it's just coincidence, but boards of directors are choosing CEOs for whom this is a business idea, it's a personal value, it's a hobby. And these are people that read about it, and the level of detailed knowledge they have about what they want to get done. They don't just give some broad brush indication to their organization that this is important. They are very numerate about these things. And thinking to the last 10 CEOs that have been hired in the consumer packaged goods space, all of those CEOs are people of enormous energy and knowledge around this. Maybe it's a coincidence, but I doubt it.
Interesting.
You know what I'd say, not necessarily representing an institutional voice from Stanford, but just a personal point of view, is I think what it means is exactly what Steve said, is you no longer pigeonhole sustainability or concern with the environment, and well, that's what the folks over in Earth Systems deal with. It's basically, I think, the youth of today, our students, I mean, they have a real thirst for that kind of knowledge. They realize they have to be citizens of the Big E, and they have to pursue that, you know, both with their personal life as well as their professional endeavors. So I think it means, you know, broader education across the spectrum would be a personal perspective. Anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll add one thing, and I think Greg kind of said it, but I was reflecting on what you were saying about the last 10 CEOs that you dealt with, and I look at ours, you know, Randall, and he had that view. So it's a good observation in his own personal life. Mm-hmm. You know, in terms of, and so he put that stake in the ground. He really believed in it. And if he didn't really believe in it, I don't think he would have gotten that investment up front to do things like the natural gas vehicles. That's a huge amount of money for us to invest, and nobody thought there was a return. And things, you know, and I could go on and on and on. We do solar, we do fuel cells, probably like a lot of the companies in here. Most of those, when you look at them on paper, don't have an immediate short-term return. So I look at it, so he's younger than a lot of folks, and I think what it is, you know, in his case, I think more and more, and I see it in my case and in my counterparts' case that run the big business units, you get exposed to that also every day. Not just your suppliers, but your kids and their friends, et cetera. And they grow up that way, and I don't think we have to worry too much about it, because I go back to what you said, is the younger generation is growing up that way.
Yeah, let me just add one thing, and I'm going to be a little philosophical, but for most of my life, I think our lives, you know, the big challenge is, you know, we're kind of in this Cold War, and there was a battle with capitalism or democracy and communism, and there were, you know, we had bomb drills and so on.
Shelters.
And now all the kids are walking around, and their big issue is, are our parents cooking the planet we're living on? And my kids are in 7th and 8th grade, is all they think about. And they're just keenly, acutely aware that, you know, I'm in my 50s, Dad will be around 20, 30, hopefully 40 years, and then we're going to be around a lot longer to be dealing with all of this stuff. And for anybody who's the CEO of a company who's selling to this 79 million new millennials, boy, oh boy, this is their key issue. And to ignore it is a surefire loser. To simply say, we're going to put a stamp on that says we're kind of green and the supply chain person is paying attention is barely adequate anymore. We have to frontally make this part of the consumer buying proposition if we're to survive. That's good news, and I think companies, not government, are going to lead in providing the solutions.
I agree with it, but I think that 7th grader is probably thinking about how he drives that Tesla too. But,
Never.
Let me just say 2 seconds. Just, I mean, I think you can see from the panelists today that, you know, it takes leadership, it takes vision, and it takes commitment. We got 3 fantastic examples of that very commitment that we're talking about. It's not an avocation, it's not a hobby. It's something that we believe to our core and we intend to get done. Jeff.
So thank you to Greg, Andy, Steve, and Steve. I I think if there's one thing that I learned from this is that this was titled View from the Top, but that view is very much driven from the bottom and embraced throughout. So I think that's really important. It's a great theme. Okay, here's the plan. We will all get up. We will all walk in that direction and grab a box lunch. You can stretch legs for about 20 minutes, 15 minutes. Let's try and be back by 11:45. 11:50 the latest, and we shall begin. We're going to have, as Buzz advertised, it's a working lunch, so we'll eat and we'll listen to the next panel, the lightning rounds. And so go ahead, grab your lunches, and let's thank our speakers. Speakers once again.